30 vintage cooking secrets from the 50s housewives. When the modern world became convenient and wasteful, we gradually forgot the kitchen wisdom that was once liquid gold in the family. Turning back to the 1950s, a time of scarce ingredients and tight budgets, the resourcefulness of housewives was the key to delicious, sufficient, and waste-free meals. From utilizing every scrap of leftovers to creating new dishes praised by husbands and children, today we explore the smart cooking hacks that subsequent generations have inadvertently forgotten. Extending ground beef with rolled oats wasn't just about saving money, it was necessary. Meat was expensive and often rationed, but families still needed protein on the plate. Instead of using a full pound of ground meat for meatloaf or burgers, housewives would mix in rolled oats. The oats absorbed the flavor, added texture, and held the mixture together. You'd never guess there was less meat. And if you seasoned it well with onion, garlic, or even ketchup, it tasted like a full pound of beef. It was healthier, more nutritious, and cheaper. This trick helped feed more mouths without compromising quality. A similar hack was mixing peanut butter into meat patties. A couple of spoonfuls of peanut butter made the mixture stickier, added fat, and delivered a subtle nutty flavor that some loved, often balanced with ketchup on top. These meatloaves were humble, hearty, and made with pride by housewives, proving cleverness in utilizing what was available. Mayonnaise for moist cakes. Remember the trick of using mayonnaise as a moisture booster for sweet cakes? Something that sounds strange on the surface, but is incredibly effective in reality. Housewives in the 1950s were constantly seeking ways to keep their baked goods tender and rich, without using up precious butter or eggs, which were expensive and sometimes rationed ingredients. Mayonnaise made from oil and eggs adds necessary fat and moisture without overpowering the cake's final flavor, which proved to be an effective hack. The truth is that when mayonnaise is added to chocolate or spice cakes, it even makes them better, delivering a richer flavor, a smoother texture, and more softness. You just mix a few spoons of mayonnaise straight into the batter. Suddenly, your homemade cake has a texture resembling something made at a high-end bakery. The moisture retention is so good that you can eat it without frosting, and still find it delicious when enjoyed with coffee. This trick became a big hit at school bake sales, church potlucks, and family dinners. Mayonnaise was also a silent savior when ingredients were limited or rationed, because if you had mayonnaise in the fridge, you had the potential to bake. Evaporated milk replaces heavy cream. In the 50s kitchen, evaporated milk was an essential hack, a reliable tool that kept the kitchen running smoothly. Heavy cream was expensive, spoiled quickly, and wasn't always easy to find at corner stores. Conversely, evaporated milk, stored in cans, could be kept for a long time and provided the richness housewives needed to whisk into sauces, soups, or desserts. They just needed to shake the can, open it, and pour it straight into the pot like a secret ingredient. It beautifully thickened dishes and delivered a silky, smooth texture that people usually only got at high-end restaurants or special dinners. It worked effectively in coffee, mashed potatoes, fudge, and even homemade ice cream, costing only a fraction of the price of heavy cream. Housewives trusted it, not because they were forced to use it, but because it really worked. If lucky enough to have 2 cans, you could even chill the can, then whip it up to make a topping for pie or pudding. It held its shape well and was used in mousses, icebox cakes, and pies. It sounds like a budget tip today, but back then it was just smart kitchen management. The pantry always had a few cans ready. In an era where smart ingredient substitution meant the difference between skipping dessert or having something sweet, evaporated milk played the role of a silent hero. It made thriftiness feel luxurious, and that meant more than anyone could imagine. It was an essential solution when heavy cream was hard to find. Stale bread into homemade croutons. Turning stale bread into homemade croutons was one of the simplest yet smartest tricks in the 1950s kitchen. Bread never kept long, especially before preservatives became common. But a good housewife would never let a loaf go to waste, as it was considered a sin in an economical kitchen. Instead, she would cut it into cubes, drizzle a little oil or bacon grease, mix with whatever spices were available, usually salt, pepper, or a pinch of garlic powder, and bake until crispy. These croutons were then stored in jars. They were added to soups, casseroles, or salads over the next few days. They brought crunch, warmth, and a sense of inventiveness to any meal. The aroma of crunchy toasted bread with a hint of garlic or butter was enough to bring the whole family into the kitchen. You didn't need to buy anything new. You just made the old new again. Kids loved them, husbands noticed them, and guests thought they were fancy, which was the funny truth since they were made from scraps. all from a slice of bread that might have been thrown away. It was a perfect example of 1950s household management. Clever, silent, and incredibly practical. Housewives learned how to turn a potential waste item into a winning side dish. Mixing salad dressing in an old ketchup bottle? Making salad dressing in a cleaned-out ketchup bottle sounds like an exaggeration, but for a 1950s housewife, it was second nature. Once the ketchup bottle was empty, she would wash it out with hot water. Then add oil, vinegar, mustard, salt, sugar, and any available herbs. After that, she would shake it up. No blender needed, no mess, just traditional elbow grease. That ketchup bottle became a reliable dressing shaker, ready whenever needed. It poured easily, stored well in the refrigerator, and cost nothing extra. You didn't need to buy fancy containers or mixers. You already had what you needed. It was ingenious, resourceful, and brought a strange satisfaction, like saving string in a jar or aluminum foil in a drawer. This hack stemmed from the spirit of wasting nothing, using everything. Housewives liked controlling their ingredients, especially with small children at the table, ensuring no artificial flavors, just what they made themselves. Today, we chase clean eating and minimizing waste trends, but back then, those ideas were simply about doing things smartly, sometimes turning trash into treasure with just one good shake. Leftover mashed potatoes into pancakes/patties. Leftover mashed potatoes turned into pancakes, or patties, was a breakfast staple in families who refused to waste even a spoonful. The process was simple. You took cold, firm mashed potatoes, added a little flour or egg, and dropped the mixture into a hot pan. Crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, it was a warm, filling, and extremely economical dish. 1950s housewives knew that potatoes were cheap, but not cheap enough to throw away. These pancakes helped extend a dish over multiple meals and added warmth to the morning. You could add chopped onions, garlic, or even leftover cheese crumbs fried in bacon grease or butter. They delivered an aroma that brought the kitchen to life. Overnight leftovers didn't mean boring, it meant cleverness. It meant knowing how to create something new from something that had already served its purpose. These potato patties didn't just fill hungry bellies, but also proved that a little imagination could go a very long way. Crushing stale cake into crumbs for dessert. Crushing stale cake into crumbs was the ultimate act of salvage in a home that wasted nothing. When a cake became dry or sat too long on the counter, housewives didn't toss it in the trash. They broke it into pieces by hand or used a rolling pin to crush it into fine crumbs. Those cake crumbs had many uses. You could press them into a pie crust with butter and sugar, sprinkle them over pudding, or layer them into a trifle. Some people even use them as a topping for fried items or mix them into new batter. It was the sweet, fragile assurance that dessert was never too far away. The cake might have been old, but the love behind it wasn't. Housewives viewed these crumbs as building blocks, not garbage. An old dessert became the beginning of another. That was the magic of mid-century homemaking. You figured out how to keep the flavor alive, even in the smallest scraps. No one guessed the pie crust used to be a birthday cake, and that was the key. Stuffed apple bake, a practical and sweet dish, was also considered a warm dessert to finish the meal lightly. Do you remember any tricks your mother or grandmother used when the house ran out of eggs, butter, or milk? Share your family's ingredient substitution secrets in the comments. Quick refrigerator pickles. Refrigerator pickling was how housewives brought a little brightness into the meal without spending all day canning or using expensive equipment. You slice cucumbers, onions, or even green beans. Pour a hot mixture of vinegar, sugar, and spices over them. Then seal the jar and chill it in the fridge. No need for boiling water baths or pressure canners. In a day or two, you would have sweet and tangy pickles, adding crunch and flavor to simple meals. They kept their crispness, looked colorful, and made a sandwich or roast meat feel more special. Best of all, it allowed you to control the flavor, adjusting the sweetness and seasoning it your way. Cold pickling felt homemade but also modern. It was quick enough for a weekday dinner, yet classic enough to impress guests. This trick kept housewives a step ahead, turning garden surplus or produce drawer scraps into little jars of joy. In a world of wasting nothing, pickling meant preservation, not just flavor. Every time you opened the fridge and smelled that pungent aroma, you felt like you had a small reward for doing things smartly. Broiler drawers. Broiler drawers were the toaster ovens of that era, except they were installed right under the oven. This was where housewives melted cheese, crisped breadcrumbs, or gave sandwiches that perfect golden top. It heated up fast and got very hot. If careful, you could slide a tray of garlic bread or a casserole in there and get a bubbly brown crust in just minutes. It was also used to toast slices of bread before pop-up toasters became common in every home. This drawer saved time and effort. It was right there, part of the cooking rhythm. You learned how to use it without burning your fingers, and once mastered, it became your best-kept secret. Housewives loved its flexibility. It didn't require extra counter space. These drawers were small, hot, and powerful, just like the women who used them. Ice trays for portioning and preservation. In the 1950s, ice cube trays weren't just for ice. Housewives used them to portion and store homemade broth, leftover sauce, or any little bit of soup that was too good to toss. Once frozen, those little cubes of flavor essence could be dropped into a pot weeks later to bring life back to stews, casseroles, or sautéed vegetables. Chicken broth from roast dinner, leftover beef drippings mixed with water were also frozen. This hack was both practical and smart. It kept meals from being bland and helped stretch flavor when seasonings were scarce. Plus, it was a way to avoid waste without relying on bulky storage containers or wasting refrigerator space. Ice cube trays were cheap, easy to clean, and always handy. You knew you were doing things right when the freezer held a few trays full of amber or golden stock. It made midweek cooking faster and tastier. Dry mustard meat rubs. Dry mustard used as a meat rub wasn't just a way to add flavor. It was a silent method of preservation, long before refrigerators dominated every kitchen. A generous amount of dry mustard, often mixed with salt, pepper, and a few available spices, was deeply rubbed into cuts of pork, beef, or even game meat. This mixture helped dry the surface, seal in the juices, and provided a subtle tang that came alive when cooked. These rubs were especially effective when meat had to be kept cool in cellars or ice boxes and used over several days. For families who couldn't afford to waste anything, it was a small layer of safety and a lot of flavor. As the meat was rubbed and rested, the mustard acted as a protective barrier, especially in roast. Today, we rarely think of spices as preservatives, but back then, a tin of mustard powder was one of the most useful things in the pantry. Storing bacon grease. Storing bacon grease in a tin can was a ritual in every working kitchen, a sign that the home was well taken care of. It sat on the back of the stove, lid open, ready to catch every drop of golden fat left over from breakfast. Housewives wouldn't waste something that could be reused, especially something as richly flavored and versatile as bacon grease. It was their secret weapon for frying eggs, potatoes, making gravy, or adding a deeper flavor to soup. Just a small spoonful could make bland vegetables appealing. It was practically a seasoning all its own, delivering a smoky, salty, and savory taste. The grease solidified when cool and would keep for weeks without spoiling. They just trusted it. Bacon wasn't something eaten every day, but when it was, you had to make it count. Even the leftover drippings were precious. The bacon grease was strained to remove crumbs, chilled until firm, and used instead of expensive butter, or shortening for biscuits, cornbread, and general frying. This was liquid gold in the kitchen, a survival tactic that stretched flavor across dozens of meals. Do you still keep a jar of bacon grease on the stove? Or what dish do you always make from leftovers? What does the memory of that warm kitchen smell like? Leave us a message. Simmering bones for broth. Simmering bones for stock was an act of transformation, taking scraps and turning them into something nutritious and flavorful. A leftover chicken carcass, beef bones, pork ribs. Nothing was wasted. Housewives would put the bones in a pot with onion ends, carrot tops, and peppercorns. Then they let it simmer, low and slow, for hours. Hours later, they had a rich stock, ready to form the base for dozens of other meals. No cartons, no bouillon cubes, just the authentic flavor of what was left behind. The stock made soups deeper, sauces richer, and even made plain rice a little more special. Bones weren't trash. They were the start of something. Housewives understood that a good pot of stock meant tomorrow's dinner was half done. This wasn't just frugality, it was skill. Making stock was a quiet foundational work in the rhythm of home life, filling the house with warmth even before anyone ate. Utilizing butter wrappers. Keeping butter wrappers was one of the quietest and most clever habits in the 1950s kitchen. After a stick of butter was finished, a housewife would fold the wrapper neatly and store it in the refrigerator or freezer. When it was time to bake, she would pull it out and use the residual butter to grease cake pans, cookie sheets, or muffin tins. It provided just enough fat to keep everything from sticking. No mess, no waste, and no need to use extra butter. This small act was part of a larger mindset. Waste nothing, use everything. Even butter-soaked paper had a second life in homes where everything had value. The wrapper had a job to do, and it did it well. It was a tiny act of economy, yet it carried a big message about resourcefulness. Wrapping sandwiches with rolled wax paper. Wrapping sandwiches with rolled wax paper was the default method for packaging love into lunch. Plastic bags weren't always available, and aluminum foil was reserved for bigger things. So, housewives would roll sandwiches tightly in wax paper, sometimes securing them with twine or ribbon. This kept the bread fresh and the filling in place. When opened, the sandwich still looked crisp and not soggy. It was part presentation, part preservation. A school lunch wrapped this way looked neat and thoughtful. For working husbands and school children, that little joy meant something. Wax paper had a soft, almost comforting crinkle when unwrapped. It didn't sweat, didn't stick, and could be tucked back into the lunchbox. In the era before disposable plastic dominated the kitchen, this was the gold standard. Canned fruit cocktail for dessert. Canned fruit cocktail was the sweet secret at the end of many 1950s meals. When fresh fruit was hard to keep fresh and budgets were tight, those small cans of syrup were a godsend. Cherries, pears, peaches, grapes, all diced and ready to pour out. Housewives would layer the fruit with whipped cream, gelatin, or cottage cheese to create something that looked fancy and felt pleasant. It was easy, fast, and colorful. Kids loved it, husbands asked for seconds, and guests never complained. These desserts were made with minimal effort but much flair. A few spoonfuls added color to a monotonous dinner and comfort to tired families. These cans lined the pantry like a promise in a tin box. Whether topped with shredded coconut, marshmallows, or a scoop of ice cream, the cocktail did its job with the quiet reliability that defined 1950s homemaking. Stuffed apple bake was also used as a sweet and filling dessert, often served after soup or beans to end the meal lightly. Jell-O gelatin preserves leftovers. Using Jell-O to preserve leftovers might sound like a joke today, but in the 1950s it was a serious solution to a serious problem: food waste. Housewives would take leftover vegetables, meat scraps, or even diced eggs and set them in flavored or unflavored gelatin. The result was a molded salad that lasted longer and looked surprisingly elegant on the table. It wasn't about showing off, but about extending the meal to the next day and keeping it safe. The gelatin encased the food, slowing spoilage and giving the family an extra day or two to use it up. You would chill the mold, bring it out when guests arrived, and suddenly leftovers became a centerpiece. Some people cringe at ham and lemon gelatin, but others swore it was delicious. When choices were scarce, you used what worked. It was economical, resourceful, and strangely festive. That wobble meant something back then. It meant no waste, full bellies, and a little color on the table. Tomato aspic salad was also a variation of this hack, made by dissolving gelatin in hot tomato juice, mixing with chopped vegetables, and chilling, considered a creative way to extend vegetables into a formal side dish. Utilizing cereal bag wax paper liners. Reusing cereal bag liners as wax paper was a kitchen hack hiding in plain sight. When the kids finished the cornflakes or puffed rice, housewives would carefully remove the inner plastic wax paper liner, shake out the crumbs, and save it. This crinkly sheet of wax paper/plastic wasn't garbage. It was a versatile kitchen tool. You could wrap sandwiches, cover leftovers, line cake pans, or even roll out pie dough without sticking. It was durable, clean, and most importantly, completely free. In the 1950s, every penny saved counted, and this clever reuse felt like a quiet rebellion against waste. Housewives found dozens of ways to repurpose things others might throw away. It was a lesson in resourcefulness, not just economy. The sound of those liners being folded and tucked into a drawer was the sound of a house run properly. Storing celery in aluminum foil. Storing celery in aluminum foil was one of those little-known hacks that distinguished a wasteful kitchen from a wise one. Plastic wrap wasn't yet a common household item, and Tupperware was still a novelty for many families. So, when a bunch of celery started to soften or go astray, housewives would wrap it tightly in aluminum foil and store it in the refrigerator. This simple act worked magically. The foil allowed just enough moisture to escape while keeping the celery firm and crisp. No soggy stalks, no strange smells, no food tossed out. That foil wrap could keep a bunch of celery fresh for nearly 2 weeks. Kids still had their crunchy snack, and soup or casserole still had that satisfying crunch. It sounds small, but it meant less waste and more money saved over time. Potato boiling water for thickening gravy. Potato boiling water as a gravy base is one of those tricks that seems too simple to bother with until you taste it. When you boil potatoes, the water turns cloudy and thickens with starch. Most people pour it down the drain, but old-school cooks saved it. That cloudy water was liquid gold, perfect for thickening gravy, stews, or even making a quick roux without butter or flour. It added body and just a hint of subtle potato flavor, which paired beautifully with meat drippings or leftover vegetables. It was warm, filling, and somehow made everything else taste richer. You can stir in pan grease or a spoonful of mustard or vinegar and have something considered a real sauce. Unfussy, but deeply satisfying. This hack barely appears in modern cookbooks. It was a silent skill, one you learned by watching, not by reading. If you could go back and try one of these old-as-new dishes, which one would you choose, and why? Let us know. Using scissors to cut herbs and bacon. Using scissors to cut herbs and bacon is one of those simple hacks that makes perfect sense. Before food processors and fancy slicers, housewives relied on kitchen shears for small tasks. A quick snip of chives over salad, a slice of parsley into soup, or even dicing bacon into strips before putting it in the pan. Everything was faster with scissors. You worked directly over the dish with no cutting board to clean. Less mess, easier control. It gave a sense of precision and ease, especially when time was tight. The pair of scissors used to open packages or cut meat wrap was washed clean and put straight to use. This trick wasn't glamorous, but it saved minutes when every minute counted. Cracker crumbs for coating. Cracker crumbs used as a meat coating was breadcrumbs before breadcrumbs existed. If a housewife ran out of store-bought breadcrumbs or never bought them in the first place, she turned to a box of crackers, often saltines, crushing them finely with a rolling pin or the bottom of a glass. The crackers became a crispy coating for chicken cutlets, pork chops, or even fried tomatoes. They adhered well, browned beautifully, and provided a salty crunch to anything tossed into the pan. You could season the crumbs or leave them plain depending on the dish. Saltines were cheap, kept long-term, and always available, which made them perfect for coating jobs. They were also a no-waste method, as old crackers were even better for this job. A similar hack was using crushed potato chips to top casseroles, creating a golden, salty, and unexpectedly satisfying crust. Stale bread was also dried, crumbled, and pan-toasted to make crispy toppings, yielding a warm, nutty flavor. Deodorizing the refrigerator with coffee grounds. Using coffee grounds to deodorize the refrigerator is one of those tricks that seems odd until it actually works. Before baking soda became the default solution, housewives would scoop used coffee grounds into a bowl and set it quietly on the fridge shelf. The coffee grounds absorbed odors without adding any strange smells of their own. It was silent, reliable, and utilized something already on hand. Housewives loved finding second lives for everyday items, and this was a win. If your fridge started smelling like onions or last Sunday's roast, the coffee grounds pulled the stink right out, and they did it naturally with no chemicals or fuss. It made opening the refrigerator door a little more pleasant, especially when guests were over. Back then, no one wanted their butter to taste like cabbage, and this little hack helped keep flavors clean and meals fresh. A similar tip was rebrewing old coffee, adding eggshells to the pot before boiling, where the shells helped settle the grounds and bitterness, creating a cleaner cup of coffee. Cabbage boiling water as soup base. Cabbage boiling water might not sound like much, but in the 1930s, it was enough to get people through hard times. Boiling cabbage was already a regular routine, but families quickly learned never to pour the water down the drain. That cloudy, sulfur-smelling liquid contained nutrition, starch, and enough flavor to be turned into a soup base. Some would add a diced potato, a handful of onion skins, or a bit of stale bread to thicken it. Others might add salt if they had it and call it dinner. There was a sense of pride in creating something from what others considered nothing. While maybe not delicious, it was hot, filling, and warming on cold days. In some homes, that broth became the start of a stew that would stretch for days. You reused everything back then, especially things no one thought to keep. Similar is celery and onion soup, made by simmering scraps like celery tops, onion peels, and water for hours. Thank you very much for watching until the end. See you in the next exciting journeys of memory exploration.